The rain was falling hard that night in Chicago. Clara pulled her thin jacket tighter around her body as she walked through the back entrance of the Grand Meridian Hotel. Her shoes were wet, her feet were cold, but she had no time to think about that. She was already 5 minutes late for her shift. At 26 years old, Clara had learned one important lesson in life. Complaining never fixed anything. Only hard work did. So she kept her head down and kept moving forward, one day at a time. She worked 2 jobs at the hotel. During the day, she cleaned rooms on the upper floors. At night, she served food and drinks at private events. Most days, she worked 14 hours straight. It was exhausting. But every time she felt like giving up, she thought about her mother lying in that hospital bed. She thought about her younger brother trying to finish college. They were counting on her. She could not let them down. That night, Clara was assigned to work a private dinner party on the top floor. The event was hosted by a man named Theodore Ashford. She had heard stories about him from other staff members. He was 73 years old and worth more money than most people could imagine. Some called him a genius. Others called him heartless. Everyone agreed on one thing, though. He was not someone you wanted to disappoint. Clara entered the grand ballroom and immediately felt out of place. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. The tables were covered with white silk cloth. Every piece of silverware probably cost more than her monthly rent. The guests wore expensive suits and designer dresses. They laughed and talked like people who had never worried about paying a bill in their entire lives. She took a deep breath and got to work. For the next 2 hours, she moved quietly between tables. She refilled glasses. She cleared plates. She smiled politely even when guests looked right through her like she was invisible. This was nothing new. In her world, being invisible was actually a good thing. It meant she was doing her job well. Around 9:30, something unexpected happened. One of the guests, a younger man who had clearly been drinking too much, stood up suddenly and bumped into a display pedestal near the wall. On top of that pedestal sat a beautiful antique vase. Clara watched in horror as the vase began to tip over. Time seemed to slow down. She did not think. She just moved. In one quick motion, she set down her serving tray and lunged forward. Her fingers closed around the vase just inches before it hit the marble floor. The room went silent. Everyone stared at her. The drunk guest looked embarrassed. A few people whispered to each other. Clara carefully placed the vase back on the pedestal and stepped away. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Then she noticed an old man watching her from across the room. He sat alone at a corner table, and his eyes had not left her since the moment she caught the vase. He was thin with silver hair and deep wrinkles around his eyes. His expression gave nothing away. He simply observed her the way a scientist might observe something under a microscope. It was Theodore Ashford. Clara quickly looked away and returned to her work. She tried to forget about those watching eyes, but she could feel them following her for the rest of the evening. When the event finally ended and the guests began to leave, Clara started collecting empty glasses from the tables. She was exhausted. Her back ached. All she wanted was to go home and sleep for a few hours before her morning shift began. Then, a voice spoke behind her. "You play an instrument." Clara turned around. Theodore Ashford was standing there, leaning slightly on an elegant wooden cane. Up close, he looked even older, but his eyes were sharp and clear. They missed nothing. "Excuse me, sir," Clara asked, confused by the question. He nodded toward her hands. "Your fingertips. They have calluses. The kind that come from pressing strings or keys for many years. Piano, perhaps. Or maybe violin." Clara looked down at her own hands. She had not thought about those calluses in a long time. They were reminders of a different life. A life she had been forced to leave behind years ago. "Piano," she admitted quietly. "I used to play. A long time ago." Theodore studied her face for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small business card. He held it out to her. I am looking for a new personal assistant, he said. The pay is generous. Far more than what you make here. If you are interested, come to this address tomorrow at noon. Clara stared at the card but did not take it. This felt strange. Rich old men did not just offer jobs to hotel workers they had never met before. Why me? She asked. You do not know anything about me. Theodore smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something others did not. I know enough, he said. I know that when everyone else in this room froze, you moved. I know that your hands tell a story, your uniform tries to hide. And I know that you are still standing here asking questions, instead of just saying yes like most people would. That tells me you are not desperate enough to be stupid. And that is rare. He placed the card on the table beside her. Come tomorrow. Or do not. The choice is yours. But I should warn you. If you do come, there will be tests. I do not hire people easily. I need to know what they are made of first. Without waiting for her response, he turned and walked away. His cane clicked softly against the marble floor until he disappeared through the main doors. Clara stood there for a long time, staring at that little white card. Her mind was racing with questions. What kind of tests was he talking about? Why did he seem so interested in her hands? And what could a man like Theodore Ashford possibly want from someone like her? She thought about her mother in the hospital. She thought about the bills piling up on her kitchen table. She thought about her brother calling last week, saying he might have to drop out because they could not afford next semester. She picked up the card. The address was for a mansion on the north side of the city, a part of town Clara had only seen from bus windows. A world completely different from her own. She did not know it yet. But that little card was about to change everything. The tests Theodore mentioned would push her to her limits. They would make her question everything she thought she knew about herself. And somewhere along the way, she would discover that the old man was not just testing her skills. He was searching for something much deeper. Something he had lost many years ago. And somehow, in ways she could not yet understand, Clara was connected to that loss. But all of that was still waiting in the future. That night, standing alone in the empty ballroom with wet shoes and tired eyes, Clara made a simple decision. She would show up tomorrow. She would take whatever tests he wanted to give. And she would prove that she was worth more than the uniform she wore. Because if there was one thing Clara knew how to do, it was survive. And sometimes, survival is just the first step towards something greater. Clara arrived at the mansion exactly at noon the next day. She had taken 2 buses to get there. And now she stood at the iron gates, feeling like she had stepped into a different world. The house was enormous. It looked like something from an old movie. Stone walls covered in ivy, tall windows reflecting the gray sky. A long driveway lined with perfectly trimmed hedges. She pressed the button on the intercom and waited. A moment later, the gates slowly opened. Clara walked up the driveway, with her heart beating fast. She had no idea what to expect. All she knew was that she needed this job more than she had ever needed anything. A woman in a neat black dress opened the front door. She introduced herself as Mrs. Bennet, the head housekeeper. She looked Clara up and down with a neutral expression, then led her inside without saying much. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than the outside. High ceilings with painted designs, antique furniture that looked hundreds of years old, paintings on every wall that probably cost more than Clara would earn in 10 lifetimes. She tried not to stare, but it was difficult. Mrs. Bennet brought her to a large office on the 2nd floor. Theodore was sitting behind a massive wooden desk, reading some papers. He did not look up when Clara entered. She stood there awkwardly for almost 2 minutes before he finally spoke. "You came," he said, still not looking at her. "I was not sure you would." You said there would be tests," Clara replied. "I am ready." Theodore finally raised his eyes. That same sharp gaze from the night before studied her face. Then he gestured to a chair across from his desk. Sit. Clara sat. What followed was the strangest job interview of her life. Theodore did not ask about her education or work experience. Instead, he asked questions that seemed to have no right answers. He asked what she would do if she found a wallet full of money on the street. He asked if she had ever lied to protect someone she loved. He asked what scared her most about the future. Clara answered honestly. She did not try to say what she thought he wanted to hear. Something told her that Theodore would see right through any lies. After an hour, he leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly. You start tomorrow, he said. 6 in the morning. Do not be late. I do not tolerate lateness. And just like that, Clara had a new job. But she quickly learned that getting hired was the easy part. The real challenge was surviving the first month. Theodore was demanding in ways Clara had never experienced before. Everything had to be perfect. His morning tea had to be served at exactly 7:15, not a minute earlier or later. His newspapers had to be arranged in a specific order on his desk. His schedule had to be memorized completely. Even the smallest mistake would earn a sharp comment that cut deeper than any insult. Clara was not the only one being tested. During her first week, she met 2 other candidates who had been hired around the same time. One was a young man named Philip, who had graduated from a fancy university. The other was a woman named Grace, who had worked for wealthy families before. Philip lasted 9 days. He quit after Theodore criticized him for 20 minutes over a misplaced envelope. Grace lasted a little longer. She made it to day 16 before breaking down in tears and walking out the front door. Clara watched them leave and wondered if she would be next. There were moments when she wanted to quit too. Moments when Theodore's cold words made her feel small and worthless. But every time she felt like giving up, she thought about her mother. She thought about her brother. She reminded herself why she was doing this. So she stayed. She adapted. She learned. Slowly, Clara began to notice things about Theodore that others might have missed. She noticed that his cruelty was not random. It always had a purpose. He was not just testing their skills. He was testing their character. He wanted to see how they handled pressure, how they responded to failure, whether they would fight back or fall apart. She also noticed that beneath all his coldness, there was something else. Something sad. Theodore rarely smiled. He spent most evenings alone in his study. He had no family who visited, no friends who called. For a man with so much money, he seemed incredibly lonely. One night, about 5 weeks into her job, Clara was organizing some old files in Theodore's study. He had gone to bed early, complaining of a headache. She was supposed to just sort the papers and leave, but then she noticed a drawer that was slightly open. Inside the drawer was a photograph in a silver frame. Clara knew she should not look, but curiosity got the better of her. She carefully pulled out the frame and held it up to the light. The photograph showed a young woman sitting at a grand piano. She had dark hair and a bright smile. Her fingers rested on the keys, like they belonged there. On the back of the frame, someone had written a message in neat handwriting. For Papa, with all my love, your Lily. 1987. Clara stared at that photograph for a long time. She had never heard Theodore mention any children. She had assumed he had always been alone. The next morning, Clara found Mrs. Bennet in the kitchen and asked her about the photograph. The older woman's face changed immediately. She looked around to make sure no one was listening, then spoke in a low voice. That was Miss Lillian, she said. Mr. Ashford's daughter. She was a wonderful girl. So talented. She could play piano like an angel. She was going to be a concert pianist. Everyone said she would be famous one day. Mrs. Bennet paused. Her eyes grew distant with memory. She died in a car accident. She continued. 30 years ago this spring. Mr. Ashford was never the same after that. He closed off his heart completely, buried himself in work, pushed everyone away. Clara felt her chest tighten. Suddenly, so many things made sense. Theodore's obsession with control, his inability to connect with people, the deep sadness she sometimes glimpsed behind his cold eyes. It was all built on grief. He was not a cruel man. He was a broken one. "There is a room in the East Wing," Mrs. Bennet added quietly. "The conservatory. It was Miss Lillian's favorite place. Her piano is still there. No one has touched it since she passed. Mr. Ashford keeps it locked. He never goes in there himself. But he cannot bring himself to get rid of it either." That night, Clara lay awake in her small apartment thinking about everything she had learned. She thought about Theodore sitting alone in that huge mansion, surrounded by expensive things but empty of love. She thought about the photograph of the smiling girl at the piano. She thought about the locked room that held 30 years of frozen grief. And she thought about her own hands, the calluses on her fingertips, the music she had left behind so many years ago. She did not know why, but she felt a strange connection to this sad old man and his lost daughter. Maybe it was because she understood what it meant to lose something precious. Maybe it was because she, too, had once dreamed of a life filled with music. Whatever the reason, Clara made a decision that night. She would not just survive this job. She would try to understand Theodore. She would try to see past his walls. And maybe, if she was patient enough, she could help him find some peace. She had no idea that fate was already setting things in motion. That very soon, she would find herself standing in front of that forbidden piano. And the music she played would change both their lives forever. But that moment was still waiting. For now, Clara closed her eyes and let sleep finally take her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, new chances to prove herself. And she would be ready for all of them. 2 more months passed. Clara had now been working for Theodore longer than anyone in recent memory. She had learned his routines completely. She knew exactly how he liked things done. And slowly, very slowly, his sharp comments became less frequent. Sometimes he even said thank you. It was not much, but for Theodore, it was almost like a warm hug. Clara had also learned to read his moods. She knew when to speak and when to stay silent. She knew when he needed company and when he wanted to be left alone. Most importantly, she had learned not to take his coldness personally. It was just his way of protecting himself from a world that had taken too much from him already. But there was one thing Clara could not stop thinking about: the conservatory in the East Wing. The locked room with the piano that nobody touched. Every time she walked past that door, she felt a strange pull, like something was calling to her from the other side. She tried to ignore it. She reminded herself that the room was forbidden. Theodore had made that very clear to all his staff. Anyone who entered without permission would be fired immediately. No exceptions. No second chances. But the pull would not go away. Clara had not played piano in almost 8 years. After her father died, her family could no longer afford her music lessons. She had to drop out of the conservatory, where she was studying. She had to give up her scholarship. She had to say goodbye to the dream she had carried since she was 6 years old. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. For months after, she would wake up in the middle of the night, with her fingers moving against the blanket, playing invisible keys. Music had been such a big part of her soul. Losing it felt like losing a piece of herself. Now, working in this mansion with a grand piano just down the hall, all those buried feelings were rising to the surface again. She found herself humming melodies she thought she had forgotten. She caught her fingers tapping rhythms on tabletops. The music inside her was waking up after a long sleep. One Thursday evening in late October, something unusual happened. Theodore received a phone call that seemed to upset him greatly. Clara did not hear the details, but she saw his face go pale. He told her to cancel all his appointments for the next 2 days, then left the mansion without explanation. Mrs. Bennet told Clara that Theodore had gone to visit an old friend who was very sick. He would not be back until Saturday at the earliest. That night, Clara finished her work early. The mansion was quiet. Most of the staff had gone home. She walked through the empty hallways, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. And somehow, without really planning it, she found herself standing in front of the conservatory door. Her heart was beating fast. She knew she should walk away. She knew the rules. But then she noticed something that made her breath catch in her throat. The door was open, just a crack. Later, Clara would wonder if it was fate. Maybe Mrs. Bennet had forgotten to lock it. Maybe the old lock had finally given up after 30 years. Or maybe something else entirely was at work. Something that could not be explained by logic. Whatever the reason, Clara found herself pushing the door open and stepping inside. The room was dark. She fumbled along the wall until she found a light switch. The conservatory was beautiful. Tall windows lined one wall, looking out over the garden. Bookshelves filled with music sheets covered another wall. Old photographs hung everywhere. And in the center of the room, covered with a white cloth, stood a grand piano. Clara walked toward it slowly, like she was approaching something sacred. She pulled off the cloth carefully and folded it aside. The piano underneath was stunning. A Steinway grand, black and shining, as perfect as the day it was made. She ran her fingers along the keys without pressing them. The ivory was cool and smooth under her touch. Memories flooded through her mind. Her father sitting beside her during practice. Her teacher clapping after a good performance. The stage lights at her final recital, warm on her face. She sat down on the bench. Her hands trembled slightly as she positioned them over the keys. She had not done this in so long. What if she had forgotten everything? What if the music was gone forever? But then her fingers pressed down, and the first notes filled the room. And suddenly, it was like no time had passed at all. She played Chopin. Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was the piece she had performed at her last recital, the night before her father collapsed. The night before, everything fell apart. She had not been able to listen to it since then. It hurt too much. But now, in this quiet room filled with someone else's grief, the music poured out of her like water breaking through a dam. Every note carried emotion. Every phrase told a story. She played with her eyes closed, letting her heart guide her hands. The piece was long and complex. It started soft and melancholy, like a sad memory. Then it built slowly, adding layers of feeling, hope and despair, love and loss, joy and sorrow, all woven together into something achingly beautiful. Clara lost herself completely in the music. She forgot where she was. She forgot about the rules she was breaking. She forgot about everything except the piano and the notes and the emotions pouring through her fingers. When the final chord faded into silence, she sat there with tears streaming down her face. She had not cried like this in years. It felt like something inside her had finally been released. Something she had been holding on to for far too long. Then she heard a sound behind her. Clara spun around on the bench, her heart nearly stopping. Theodore stood in the doorway. He was supposed to be gone until Saturday. But there he was, still wearing his traveling coat, his face half hidden in shadow. And even in the dim light, Clara could see the tears on his cheeks. She jumped to her feet, words tumbling out in a panic. "I am so sorry. The door was open and I know I should not have. Please, I can explain." But Theodore raised his hand, and she fell silent. He did not look angry. He did not look like he was about to fire her. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. "That piece," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That was Lillian's favorite. She played it constantly. She was practicing it the week before she died. I have not heard it since." Clara did not know what to say. She stood there frozen, waiting for whatever would come next. Theodore walked slowly into the room. He moved past her and stood beside the piano, running his fingers along the same keys she had just played. His eyes were distant, lost in memories from another time. "She would have been 52 this year," he said quietly. "Can you imagine? My little girl, 52 years old. But in my mind, she is always 22. always sitting at this piano, always smiling. He turned to look at Clara, and for the first time since she had known him, his eyes were completely unguarded. All the walls were down. All the coldness was gone. There was only grief and loneliness and a desperate need to connect with something he had lost. "You play beautifully," he said. "She would have liked you." Clara felt tears welling up again. She did not trust herself to speak. Theodore looked at her for a long moment. Then he took a deep breath and seemed to make some kind of decision. "There are things I need to tell you," he said. "Things about why I really hired you. But not tonight. Tonight is for remembering." He gestured toward the piano bench. "Play it again, please. Let me hear her favorite piece one more time." And so Clara sat back down. She placed her hands on the keys, and she played Chopin's Ballade once more, while an old man stood beside her and wept for the daughter he had never stopped loving. In that moment, something shifted between them. A door had opened that could never be closed again, and both of their lives were about to change in ways neither of them could have imagined. Clara did not sleep that night. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened in the conservatory. The music, the tears, Theodore's face when he heard Chopin filling the room his daughter used to love. She kept waiting for the fear to come, the worry about losing her job. But strangely, she felt calm. Whatever was going to happen next, she was ready for it. The next morning, Clara arrived at the mansion at her usual time. Mrs. Bennet met her at the door with a curious expression. "Mr. Ashford wants to see you in his study," she said. "Right away." Clara nodded and made her way upstairs. Her footsteps felt heavier than usual. This was it, the moment of truth. She knocked on the study door and waited. "Come in." She entered the room. Theodore was sitting behind his desk, but something was different about him today. He looked tired, like he had not slept either. But there was also something softer in his eyes. The sharp edges that usually guarded him seemed to have faded overnight. "Sit down, Clara," he said. His voice was gentle. She had never heard him speak like that before. She sat in the chair across from him and folded her hands in her lap. Theodore was quiet for a long moment. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts, choosing his words carefully. Finally, he spoke. "I owe you an apology," he said. "And an explanation. You deserve to know the truth about why you are here." Clara frowned slightly. "I thought I was here to be your assistant." Theodore shook his head slowly. "That was never the real reason. The assistant job was just a cover, a way to observe you, to test you, to see if you were the person I was looking for." Clara felt confusion rising in her chest. "I do not understand. What person? What were you looking for?" Theodore reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. He placed it on the desk between them. "Over the past 5 years," he said, "I have interviewed more than 200 candidates, men and women from all backgrounds. Some were highly educated. Some came from wealthy families. Some had impressive resumes filled with achievements. But none of them were right. None of them had what I needed." He opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, and handwritten notes. Clara could see her own picture among them. "I was not looking for someone to manage my schedule," Theodore continued. "I was looking for someone with 3 specific qualities: resilience, integrity, and hidden depth. Someone who had faced real hardship but refused to let it break them. Someone who would tell the truth, even when lying would be easier. And someone who carried something beautiful inside them that the world had tried to crush." He looked directly at Clara. "The night I saw you catch that vase, I knew you had quick reflexes and calm nerves. When I noticed your fingertips, I suspected there was more to your story. And when I watched you over these past months, I saw everything I needed to see. You never complained. You never cut corners. You treated everyone with respect, from me down to the gardeners. And last night, when you played that piano, I finally understood." Clara's mind was spinning. Understood what? Theodore stood up slowly and walked to the window. He stared out at the gray sky for a moment before speaking again. Lillian had a dream, he said quietly. Ever since she was a little girl, she wanted to open a music school. Not a fancy conservatory for rich children. Something different. A place where kids from poor families could learn to play. Kids who could never afford lessons. Kids whose parents worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. She wanted to give them what she had been given. The gift of music. He turned back to face Clara. She was going to call it the Ashford Music Academy. She had plans drawn up. Locations picked out. She was so excited about it. And then one rainy night, a drunk driver ran a red light, and all those dreams died with her. And one the rainy, Clara felt tears forming in her eyes. She could see the pain on Theodore's face, raw and real, even after 30 years. I have spent 3 decades building my fortune, Theodore said. I have more money than I could ever spend, but none of it means anything to me. It is just numbers on paper. The only thing that matters is keeping Lillian's dream alive. But I could not do it alone. I needed someone to run it. Someone who would understand what it means to struggle. Someone who knows what music can do for a broken soul. He walked back to his desk and sat down heavily. I have been searching for 5 years. Testing candidates. Watching them fail. And then you walked into that ballroom with your worn shoes and your tired eyes and your calloused fingertips. And I thought maybe, just maybe, I had finally found her. Clara's voice came out as a whisper. Found who? The person who can bring my daughter's dream to life. The room fell silent. Clara could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She could not believe what she was hearing. This had to be some kind of mistake. She was nobody. A hotel worker. A woman who had given up on her own dreams years ago. How could she possibly be the answer to anything? I do not know what to say. She finally managed. I am not qualified for something like this. I dropped out of music school. I have no experience running anything. You need someone better than me. Theodore smiled. It was a real smile this time. Warm and genuine. I have met plenty of qualified people, he said. They all failed my tests. They crumbled under pressure. They lied when things got hard. They had degrees and experience, but no heart. You have something they did not. You have survived things that would have destroyed most people, and you came out the other side with your kindness intact. That cannot be taught. He leaned forward. I am not asking you to do this alone. I will pay for any training you need. I will hire the best staff to support you. I will handle all the finances. All I need from you is your heart, your passion, your understanding of what this school could mean to children who have nothing. Clara sat in stunned silence. Her whole life, she had felt like she was just surviving, getting through one day at a time, never daring to dream of anything bigger. And now this old man was offering her a chance to do something meaningful, something that could change lives. But doubt crept into her mind. Why me? She asked again. Really? Out of all the people in the world, why would you trust me with your daughter's dream? Theodore was quiet for a moment. Then, he asked a question of his own. If I gave you everything you needed, what would you build? Clara did not have to think about her answer. It came from somewhere deep inside her. A place she had kept locked away for years. A place where no child has to choose between surviving and dreaming, she said. A place where being poor does not mean being forgotten. A place where music can heal the wounds that life leaves behind. End of way. Theodore nodded slowly. His eyes were shining. That is exactly what Lillian would have said. He reached across the desk and took Clara's hand in his. His grip was firm, but gentle. I am old, he said. I do not have many years left. But before I go, I want to see her dream become real. I want to hear music filling a building with her name on it. I want to watch children who remind me of you discover that they are worth something. Will you help me do that? Clara looked at this man who had seemed so cold and cruel when she first met him. She saw now that every harsh word had been a test. Every impossible demand had been a way of searching for strength, and underneath all of it was a father who had never stopped loving his daughter. She squeezed his hand. "Yes," she said, "I will." And in that moment, both of their lives changed forever. The next 18 months were the most challenging and rewarding of Clara's life. Theodore kept his promise. He enrolled her in an accelerated arts administration program at one of the best universities in the country. He hired tutors to help her catch up on everything she had missed. He brought in experts to teach her about running a nonprofit organization. And through it all, he remained by her side, guiding her with patience she never knew he had. Clara worked harder than she had ever worked before. She studied late into the night. She visited music programs across the country to learn what worked and what did not. She met with architects and designers to plan every detail of the new building. Some days she felt completely overwhelmed. Some days she wondered if she was fooling herself, but every time doubt crept in, she remembered why she was doing this. She thought about the little girl she used to be, practicing piano in a tiny apartment while her parents worked double shifts. She thought about all the children out there right now who had the same dreams but no way to reach them. Theodore's health began to decline during the second year. The doctors said his heart was getting weaker. He needed to rest more. He needed to slow down. But the old man refused to stop. He insisted on being involved in every decision. He wanted to see his daughter's dream come to life with his own eyes. Finally, on a bright spring morning, the Lillian Ashford Music Conservatory opened its doors. The building stood on the south side of Chicago, right in the heart of one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. It was beautiful. 3 stories of red brick with tall windows that let in streams of natural light. Inside were practice rooms and performance halls, and a library filled with music sheets. And in the main lobby, a bronze plaque with Lillian's photograph and the words she had written in her journal 30 years ago. "Music is the voice of the soul. Let every child find their voice." The opening ceremony was packed. Community leaders came. Local politicians came. Reporters and photographers filled the back of the room. But the most important guests were the children. 50 kids from the neighborhood, ages 6 to 16, had been selected for the first class. They sat in the front rows with wide eyes, not quite believing that this place was for them. Clara stood backstage, her hands trembling. She was supposed to give a speech. She was supposed to perform a piece to officially open the conservatory. But looking out at all those faces, she felt her courage slipping away. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder. Theodore stood beside her, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked frail now, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "Nervous?" he asked. Clara nodded. "What if I mess up? What if I let everyone down?" Theodore smiled gently. "You could never let anyone down. You have already done something extraordinary. Whatever happens on that stage, nothing can take that away." He squeezed her shoulder. "Lillian would be so proud of you. I am so proud of you." Clara felt tears threatening to spill. She hugged the old man carefully, afraid of hurting him. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me when I could not believe in myself." Theodore patted her back. "Thank yourself. I just opened the door. You are the one who walked through it." A few minutes later, Clara stepped onto the stage. The audience fell silent. She looked out at the sea of faces, the children in the front rows, the proud parents behind them, the staff and volunteers who had worked so hard to make this day possible. And Theodore, sitting in a special chair near the side of the stage, watching her with tears in his eyes. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "I grew up poor," she said. "My family had nothing, but we had music. My father used to say that music was the one thing nobody could take from us. It did not matter how small our apartment was or how empty our refrigerator was. When I sat at the piano, I was free. She paused, gathering herself. When I was 18, I had to give up my dream of becoming a pianist. Life got in the way. Bills piled up. Responsibilities took over. I thought that part of my life was over forever. But then I met someone who taught me that dreams do not die. They just wait for the right moment to wake up again. She looked at Theodore. This conservatory exists because of one man's love for his daughter, and because he refused to let her dream disappear. Today, we honor Lillian Ashford. We honor her vision of a world where every child can discover the power of music. And we promise to carry that vision forward, one note at a time. The audience applauded. Clara walked to the grand piano at the center of the stage. It was the same Steinway from Theodore's mansion. He had donated it to the conservatory, saying it belonged here now, saying it was time for it to make music again. Clara sat down on the bench. She placed her hands on the keys, and she began to play. Chopin. Ballade. Number 1, in G minor. The same piece she had played that night in the forbidden room. The same piece Lillian had loved so much. The music filled the hall. Every note echoed off the walls and wrapped around the audience like a warm embrace. Clara played with everything she had. All her pain, all her hope, all her gratitude for the second chance she had been given. When the final chord faded into silence, nobody moved. Then, slowly, the audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous. Children were cheering. Parents were crying, and Theodore sat in his chair with his eyes closed and a peaceful smile on his face. 2 years later, Theodore passed away in his sleep. He went quietly, the way he had wanted. In his will, he left the majority of his fortune to the conservatory, ensuring it would continue for generations. He also left a personal letter for Clara. She read it alone in the conservatory library, surrounded by the music that had brought them together. Dear Clara, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I have finally gone to see my Lillian again. Do not be sad for me. I have waited 30 years for this reunion. You gave me something I thought I had lost forever. You gave me hope. You gave me purpose. You reminded me why I kept fighting all those years. You did not just pass my tests. You reminded me why I created them in the first place. Lillian would have called you sister. And I am honored to have called you family. Keep the music alive. Keep her memory alive. And never forget that you are worth more than you know. With all my love, Theodore. Clara cried for a long time after reading that letter. But they were not only tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude. For the old man who saw something in her that she could not see in herself. For the daughter who dreamed of helping children she would never meet. For the strange twist of fate that brought them all together. Today, the Lillian Ashford Music Conservatory has produced over 300 graduates. Some have gone on to perform on international stages. Others have become teachers themselves, passing the gift of music to new generations. And every year, on the anniversary of the opening, Clara sits at that old Steinway and plays Chopin. She plays for Lillian. She plays for Theodore. She plays for her father, who first put her hands on the keys. And she plays for every child who was ever told their dreams were too big or too expensive or too impossible. Because if Clara learned one thing from her journey, it was this. Dreams never really die. They just wait for someone brave enough to bring them back to life. And sometimes, all it takes is one classical piece to change everything.